Abraham and his call from God to build a nation, and what that means, and who he was, and what that means to us. I think it's really easy to look at biblical characters like Abraham or Jacob or Isaac, talk about how amazing they were. Look how screwed up their families were. Deception, and lying, and favoritism. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. In chapter 1 last week, we talked about how God had a vision for his people. His vision was to create people and then to spend time with them in a great relationship in a great place, the garden. But that didn't work out so well. People chose to do things their own way, and they got kicked out of the garden. And that evil that got them kicked out of the garden, or as Randy Frazee says in our Bible study, escorted out. That behavior that got them escorted out carried on for generations and generations. And after generations, the world was a pretty dark and dangerous and ugly place. And God regretted that he had made people. But he still wanted to hang out with them. He still wanted that relationship. And so we see him destroy a bunch of people, but save Noah and his family. So now we see the descendants of Noah and what God is going to do about bringing the people of the earth back to him and back to his relationship with him and back to the garden. And so we see that today in how he approaches this guy Abraham in a place called Ur, a town near Babylon. And why he chose it. Now, if I was going to build a nation, if you were going to build a nation, who would you choose to do that? Probably some vibrant, young couple and their kids, with 20 kids, and they could create a whole bunch of people from them. But God didn't do that, did he? He chose this old couple with no kids and no ability to have kids. And they were just regular old people. He had some money. He lived in a nice part of the world. But they were unlikely and kind of boring. But he chose them. Because God is in the business of bringing unremarkable people to him and then doing remarkable things through him. So God calls on Abraham, and he says, I want you to follow me, and I want you to create a relationship, and I want you to create a nation of people that are faithful. I want you to create a nation of people that have faith in me. And Abraham says, yes. And this is why he's such a hero of the Bible, because he knows he's not the obvious choice, clearly. And he lives in a nice part of the world, and he's doing great. And I give up all this. And then he has no idea what this means for his family. I mean, imagine you go home one night and say, hey, honey, I had a conversation with God today, and he said, we're going to uproot everybody and all the animals in the house and the kids, and we're going to move to somewhere. We don't know where. Yeah, I bet that went over really well. But that's what he did. He went. And so he's a man who is credited with living a faithful relationship with God and living out his faith and creating a nation where this faith is key to what the character of the nation is about. So this faith in God is important to what God's nation is. What is faith in God? Well, there are a lot of definitions for that. Hebrews 11, the book of Hebrews, which is a New Testament book, by the way, written to the Hebrew people, says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things that are not seen. So we live by faith, we don't see it. We live by faith, not by sight. And Luther speaks a lot about faith. He says, faith in God is God's work in us that's changing us. Faith in God makes us completely different people. And faith changes our hearts, and it changes our spirits, and it changes our thoughts. And faith makes us people who are righteous before God, who are right, who are good and right in the right place before God. So God calls Abram, and he calls us to live out this faith, to be people who live in faith with him. And then he puts Abram in this place of being this guy who's an example for us. So let's look at what it means to be a faithful follower of God. Let's look at the life of Abram. In Genesis 15, we see that Abraham believed in God. So that's an important part of being faithful. You got to believe in God. And in Genesis 12, we see that he trusted God. Scripture says he did this crazy thing. By faith, Abraham, we're called, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. So he just said, okay, God, send me and I'll go wherever. Pretty crazy. He believed and he trusted. Then we see that once Abraham got to the place he was called to, he stayed there. He was committed. He made it work. It wasn't the most pleasant. It wasn't real obvious he was supposed to be there. But he stayed there. We read in Hebrews, by faith he went to live in the land of promise, living with tents, with Isaac and Jacob, and heirs of the same promise. And then, of course, we see this terrible thing where God says, hey, I want you to sacrifice this son you waited 100 years to have. And Abraham says, okay. He is obedient. He acts on what God calls him to do. So Abraham is clearly a man who is right with God and who is living out this life of belief, and trust, and steadfastness, and obedience. This is what it means to be a faithful follower of God. This is what Abraham was called to. This is what we are called to. And I ask you, how is your belief and trust and obedience and steadfastness? Is it like Abraham's? I bet it's not. Except there's good news here. That's not the whole story of Abraham. It's really easy to put Abraham up on this pillar and say, oh gosh, Father Abraham. And we should. I mean, God came to him. But Abraham screwed it up as much as he got it right. Abraham was told very specifically, you and Sarah will have a child. And that child will be the beginning of this new nation. And what did Abraham do? He said, yes, sir. No. He listened to Sarah, who was doubting as well, who said, I don't think God really knows what he's doing. I'm 90, you're 99. And, Hagar over here, my servant, she'll have a child for you. Would it be okay, Abraham, if you slept with her? Abraham seemed to say yes. They did not trust that God had a plan that he was going to execute. And so he made his own plan because he did not live in trust. He did not obey what God told him to do. And to this day, the child of Hagar is the ancestor of Islam. So we are still kind of struggling with some of the consequences of Abraham's actions. When Abraham moved to that new kingdom, he met a king. And the king said, wow, that's a good-looking woman in your entourage there. And Abraham thought to himself, wow, that's my wife. But if I tell you that she's my wife, you'll probably kill me and take her. So she's my sister. Would you like her? The king said, yeah. And then God came to the king in a dream and said, if you take that woman, I will destroy you and your kingdom. king came back and said, what's going on here, Abraham? Oh, well, she's really my wife. Well, you lied to me. Abraham did not trust that God was going to protect him. So he lied to this king and set the king's kingdom to be destroyed by God, because he didn't trust that God really had a plan for him. And later, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? God says he's going to destroy these two towns. And Abraham's nephew, Lot, is living in Sodom. And Abraham says, they're really evil. And they were really an evil, ugly town. And God was going to wipe them off the earth. And Abraham thought, he shouldn't do that. So he gets into this negotiation with God, saying, God, you're a good God. Why would a good God destroy some people if there are good people in that town? Why would you do that? Gosh, there are a lot of bad people, but there are a few good people. You wouldn't really do that, would you? Abraham did not trust that God knew how to get rid of evil. And so he gets into this whole negotiation with him, because Abraham knew better. See, Abraham was pretty good at this faith thing, but he also made some really dumb errors too. We are called to have faith like Abraham. We're called to make those good decisions. But we are also called to have faith like Abraham, and God knows we will, and God knows that we are going to make errors as well. Sometimes our faith will be strong and empowering, and we will make great decisions, and sometimes it will be weak and wanting. And we will struggle with our faith. And we will just not do it. We will make dumb mistakes. Just like Abraham. And God knows that. And he expects that. And when we, people of faith, fail like that, he lavishes his forgiveness on us. When we fail at our faith, God loves forgiving us. I have a story about a group of people that were faithful, but then really struggled with their faith. In 1839, there is a group of immigrants that come to the United States. They live in a country that has decided that they're going to take all the churches in that country and mush them together into one country's church. It would be like the American government saying, okay, all you Methodists and Presbyterians and Lutherans and Catholics, we're going to mush you together, we're going to have the American church. Well, this group of immigrants said, we can't be faithful to what we know and believe and do that. We can't let the government do this to us. So after being arrested for a few years, beat up and hassled, they finally said, we're going to America. So they rent 4 boats and they sail to America. 3 of the boats actually arrive. One just was lost. So they get to America and they land in New Orleans, and they're told to go up the river to this place called St. Louis. And they get to St. Louis and it's far too worldly and far too. So they decide, we're going to go back down the river another 100 miles to this place called Perry County, out in the middle of nowhere. And they set up this colony. And in the colony, they decided to be faithful. We need to keep this colony together, and we need to pledge our allegiance to our leader, Martin Stephan. We'll call him our bishop. He's our church authority. He's our government authority, and we're going to follow him. So they set up this town out in the middle of the boonies of America. And they're faithful people, trying to make faithful decisions. And then it's winter. And they lost a bunch of their equipment on this boat that never showed up. And Martin Stephan, their bishop, is a terrible financial manager and squanders his money. And he becomes this autocratic guy who's living in this nice house, and everybody else is out living in tents in the snow. And then he starts sleeping with their wives and daughters. And they said, we're not going to do this anymore. And this faithful group of people votes and to to convict him of just terrible behavior. And they literally put him on a rowboat and said, there's Illinois, row across the river and we'll never come back here. And they kick him out. And he never came back to Missouri. That is the description of the first year of the LCMS. That is the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod we are in today. We were started in this environment of corruption and seduction and mismanagement. And people, once this happened, they thought, we've lost our bishop. We no longer are a church because we don't have a bishop. In fact, are we even Christians? Because we're not tied. We don't even know. Are we just a mob of German people sitting here in the middle of Missouri? They didn't know. They finally did figure that out. It was actually very good for them because they figured out we don't need a bishop to be a church. But they struggled deeply with their faith. What does it mean to be a Christian? Today, the LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, is 3-4 million people. One of the bigger churches in America. We're one of the oldest churches in America. We've had a big impact on this country. God took this group of confused and upside down Lutherans and he created a community that he is at work in. God took Abraham and his messed up family and created a nation that has lasted for thousands of years. God is calling people into his nation. Not great, powerful, super Christians, regular, messed up, faith-struggling Christians. If he can do that with Abraham and his people, if he can do it with all those hungry, cold Lutherans, he can do it with us. And he is. He has called us, regular people, who struggle with our faith, to come together and be his people. We are his people, and he has great plans for us. In Jesus' name.